Hello, everyone. It is the Aram Public Library, and it is Friday, and we are joining the Master Gardeners um, on a topic of extending the season. So this is the UW Extension Walworth County Master Gardeners here to help you extend your gardening season. Welcome.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Hi, my name is Julie Hill. We have Ruth and Sue here with her lovely helper helping us today. And we just have Ruth's video off just for bandwidth issues. So hopefully that'll help. So sorry you can't see her in person. But my name is Julie. I am the Horticulture Outreach Specialist for Walworth and Rock counties. And I work for University of Wisconsin Division of Extension. So I am here to help provide horticulture knowledge or gardening information. And we're here every week providing some tips, some advice, and answering your questions. So if you have questions, drop them into those comments. We'd love to hear them. Just type them in and we will get to them in a couple minutes. So we're going to share some information today that I'm going to get to in just a minute. I want to thank Aram Library first. It's so fun to be here every week with Michelle and Aram Library hosting us. We're going to be doing this through September, through our growing season. And we're here every week offering a little bit of advice to help you become better gardeners and answering your questions. So like I said, I'm with the University of Wisconsin Division of Extension, and it's really my job to help connect all of you and all of our local communities with our resources. Another big thing, kind of my claim to fame, is helping find credible information. So if you have a question, you know that myself and these master gardeners are giving you correct university-based, research-based information. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we talked last week about how we can find just anything on the internet, right? Which is fantastic, instant access to everything, but it might not all be that great of information. So we really strive to provide you with good advice. Master gardeners are a huge part of that. I'd like to let you know that they do go through a whole certification process and have to maintain that certification every year. So our volunteers are volunteering in our community at lots of different projects. This year definitely looks a little different, and that's why we started these virtual programs. Normally you would be seeing us at maybe some more events and farmers markets and fun events in the communities and helping answer questions. So we're kind of taken to this virtual platform during our current situation. So I want to talk a little bit about our Wisconsin growing season. It's kind of relatively short, not as short as it is up in northern Wisconsin or other areas, but it kind of is determined by when we have the frost dates. So we usually have our last frost in spring, which is right around the first week of May, maybe the last week of April, first week of May. Typically, I would say after Mother's Day, it's a little bit more safe that we're not worried about frost as much. And then our first frost in fall is usually the first couple of weeks in October. That doesn't mean all is lost though. And it's kind of hard to think about frost dates and getting colder when we've had such hot weather this week, but we're kind of approaching where, things start to peter off in our gardens. And so we want to talk a little bit today about maybe how to extend the growing season and some ideas that even if you don't use them this year, you can think ahead for next year. I just want to mention too that sometimes we have those frosts in the first couple of weeks of October, but it doesn't mean that everything's just going to die off. A lot of our hardy plants might not be damaged, and we're going to talk about ways to kind of protect our plants too so that that frost doesn't hurt them. That's when things are, light frost is usually about the 32-degree mark, but when we have a hard frost or a killing frost, that comes when temperatures are lower than 28 degrees for a longer period of time. So when we have those first couple of days of the 32-degree kind of mark, things can still be okay, especially if we help some of our plants along. So this is a map. I know it looks really weird and confusing. It is a map of Wisconsin. There's all these different frost dates. If you look at the northern part, you'll see that their frost dates here in the spring on the left are, they're going to get frost all the way into June. So that really affects the growing season. Here down at the bottom of the map, in this red circle are Rock and Walworth counties, and that says April 26th to the 2nd of May. So kind of that first week, and then there's the light gray is even to the 9th of May. So that's why I kind of say after Mother's Day, you're a little bit more safe, and that's kind of the kind of the mark that we use. And then in the fall, looking at Rock and Walworth counties in that red circle, usually that first and second week of October is when to expect the first frost. So in general, if you're growing some of these crops like beans and cantaloupe and corn and maybe your peas and your peppers, in general, a frost can kill those. Tomatoes are very sensitive to the cold, and your watermelons and things like that. Some other things that are going to be okay with the colder temperatures, that they might kind of show some burning on the foliage from the cold, but they're not going to be killed off, are your broccolis and your cabbages and your cauliflower, those types of things, and your lettuces. Those are going to be okay in colder temperatures. And then if you really have some things planted that are really cold weather hardy, those are your beets and your Brussels sprouts, carrots, the kale. I have some kale growing in my garden, and spinach and parsley and things like that. So those are really gonna be okay in the cold and do well in the cold. So we're going to talk about the top 5 ways to extend your growing season. The number one way is when we're kind of predicting those frost, where it gets real cold at night, you can cover up your plants. The picture on the left just shows some bed sheets, and the picture on the right is something called a floating row cover. The point here is you don't have to be super fancy. You probably have some spare bed sheets laying around that you don't really use anymore, but you keep. You just kind of tent them over your plants and kind of tuck them in. That helps keep the heat in for that night, and then you can uncover them in morning and let them air out and heat up again. You don't want to keep the covers on because you don't want moisture to develop in there, and then having that moisture freeze can harm the plants. Floating row covers are great. They make it really easy just to kind of cover up the crop or cover up the plants, and the bricks help hold it down. But you can use anything. There's other devices out there that you can certainly purchase, or even putting some maybe a spare pot over some of your annuals that you want to keep going a little bit longer, something like that. It's just kind of providing some protection when those first frost days come about. Another way that you can extend your growing season is to be planting for a fall harvest. So a lot of things kind of peter out and are done with the heat of the summer. There are things that you can plant in the summer, and then you can harvest them in the fall. And so something to pay attention to is, if you're planting something, is that days to harvest or the days to maturity on a seed packet. This seed packet here is just showing an example from a spinach packet, so you can look at the 45 days to harvest, and then you can kind of think about, okay, in the beginning of October is our first frost, and counting back 45 days from that, and that gives you an idea of when to plant. So it does take some planning. I'm going to also post in the comments a really great resource from the University of Minnesota about fall harvest and midsummer planting, so it gives some ideas of when to plant different crops. But you can certainly be planting things in the later part of the summer, like spinach and lettuce, that are going to do well in the cold, and that they'll be ready for the fall. So not everything is all quite done yet. We still have time to be growing things. All right, Ruth, I'm going to turn it over to you if your Zoom is working.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll give it a shot. Okay, so this one as a season extender is a little bit, it's not real intuitive, but taking care of your soil. One of the ways that you can do that is to plant cover crops any place where your flowers or your vegetables are not growing at the moment. So I ripped out all my pea plants the other day. I pulled out my corn plants and chopped them up and threw them in the compost. So I have these big holes in my garden. And so what I could do is I could go ahead and plant some cover crops to fill that space. And that would be something that would come up and grow pretty quickly. And then it might be killed at the end of the season, and I would leave it on the garden bed, and it would help protect the soil from wind and water erosion. It would also, if I were to dig the remains of the crop in during the spring, it would help add nutrients and organic matter to the soil. And if you think about it, if you want to extend your growing season, you're going to be taking more out of the soil. So it's good to make sure that you continue to put more into the soil to actually support that well. And then there's a number of different kinds of cover crops, and some of them can be crops in and of themselves. So I have some oats that I am probably going to go and plant in those empty spaces. Maybe I'll get oats out of them, or if I planted them in spring, someplace where I was going to put my tomatoes, maybe where I could plant the oats early in the season and maybe get a harvest of some oats before. Some root vegetables are also used as cover crops, like radishes and turnips and so forth. So you can possibly look at it as both protecting your and enriching your soil and possibly getting a crop out of it as well.
Great.
I threw in here because of the things that everybody can do without doing anything. Frost is threatening. You're expecting 29 degrees overnight. Oh, I don't have any allergies. Go out and pick every single one of those green tomatoes and bring them in the house and lay them out on either newspapers or cookie sheets or something and ripen. They will continue to ripen slowly. A few of them will rot, but most of them will continue to ripen, and you may still have tomatoes at Thanksgiving. And then the last one is extending the season on the other end, where you are either plants, or if you are purchasing plants, you are already extending your season, because if you were to start tomatoes from seed outside in your garden on, let's say, May 10th, you might be mid-December. Disappointing. The beginning of the growing season, and then that allows you to grow things and to have them in production at a time that's more reasonable for you. So that's another good way to extend the season.
Thanks so much, Ruth. Those are some great ways. I'm going to post lots of links to some resources in the comments about things that we talked about. There'll be a resource about cover crops. So if you're interested in learning more about that and what cover crops to use, I think that's something I'm going to try this year. I've never done it before, but I think it would be really helpful for my soil. I'm going to post my email address. So if you have questions that we don't get to today, or are watching this program at another time, please just email me with your question. I would love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear your feedback too. So I'll post a link to a survey in the comments. Thanks so much.
So thank you once again to our fabulous master gardeners and our special guest. And if you have any questions, I just want to remind you, make sure to put them in the comments, and Julie and company will see them during the week and get back to you right away. So thank you, everyone. Stay cool, drink your water, and be safe. And thanks for joining us.